This episode is brought to you exclusively by Audible, the leading provider of audiobooks. Listeners of this very show can download a free ebook on us for free and get an extended free trial of the service by going to audiblepodcast.com/100words. Now, here's the rest of the show.
This podcast is part of the How We Are network. For information on this episode and many other like-minded shows, visit howweare.org. That's HOWWEARE.org.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. We are sitting here at episode 90, and I have a feeling that a lot of you have probably never heard of this show before until this episode because we have such a huge guest on. So, welcome. On the show today is Stephen Egerton from the fucking Descendents. He also played in All, and he currently plays in the iteration of Flag. Descendents. Jesus Christ. Let's just get some business out of the way, and then I'll try to wrap my head around how I describe my love for that band. Visit propertyofzach.com. They are great media partners. You should visit that site. You will become educated in what's happening within independent music, from tours and releases and everything else. That's the place to go. And then visit 100wordspodcast.com. I post stuff throughout the week there, so I would enjoy you to engage in that sort of stuff. And then you can email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com, because I've been getting some people recommending other guests, because I'm in that level now where it's like, I want to start to think outside of my own typical network or whatever. So if you have ideas, please email them to me. If you would be so kind as to drop a review on the iTunes store. So find 100 Words Podcast there, drop some stars, and if you're feeling ever so generous, you can write a few words about it. It's been slowed around the holidays because I obsessively check it. Probably like once a week I check, be like, oh, is there anything new? If you would do that, I would really appreciate that. Help my my OCD-ness on that. Let's talk about Stephen Egerton. So the Descendents, I credit the Descendents for getting me into independent music. I was watching the movie Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater, a great 80s movie if you have not checked it out. Basically, it's about Christian Slater hosting a pirate radio station, which is essentially, he was kind of predating podcasts. Like, let's be honest, maybe that was an inspiration. I didn't even know about that. But so Christian Slater is doing a pirate radio broadcast to basically his high school, and he is a total loner. No one knows that it's him. He disguises his voice. Great movie. It throws the entire high school into upheaval, and people are just like, oh my gosh, like, this guy needs to be stopped. We need to find him. And in the movie, he plays a Descendents song, Der Wiener Schnitzel. And at the time, I was really into humor and music. And for those of you that are old enough, there was a comedy duo named the Jerky Boys, even though they didn't really do music, but they did like prank phone calls. And I don't know, I mean, you know, I was in like 7th grade. What do you expect? Like, I like dick and fart humor. That's fine. So Der Wiener Schnitzel came on. I mean, it's like a 10-second song. It's punk, but it's funny. And I was like, whoa, who is this? And so he says, oh, this is Descendants. And so I immediately seeked them out. And actually, one of my friend's older brothers had Summary, which is basically a greatest hits collection. I was like, oh my gosh, I saw this, and, you know, told him about it, and he let me borrow it. And at that point, it was like, oh my God, like, this speaks to me. The punk anger of it, the sappiness of the lyrics. There was just so many things about it that I just identified with. And it kind of opened my eyes up to this whole world of pop punk and independent music. Because at that time, I was just teetering on the edge. I had, you know, started to fiddle around with bands that are on like the Epitaph roster as far as like Pennywise and that sort of stuff. But this kind of, you know, really pushed me over the edge. And this is where I started to get into like Lagwagon and No Use for a Name, and basically this was my entry point into independent music. So because of that, they're so fucking important to me. I've been toying around with the idea, and I don't know why I haven't done it yet, but of getting a Descendents tattoo. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. Stephen Egerton is the drummer for the Descendents, and he was gracious enough to hang out with me for about an hour on the phone, and I knew him through some professional business dealings, and I'll tell that story at the beginning of the podcast. I was so ecstatic about this. Like, I couldn't believe that I was talking to him on the phone in this regard. And he was open enough to be like, yeah, let's go over the whole thing. Because, sometimes when people agree to do an interview, they don't know that I would be like, all right, let's start you back at the beginning. So he was gracious enough to walk me through all that and probably tell stories he either hasn't thought about in a while or has recounted them a million times because of the Descendents documentary that just recently came out. I could go on for a while, but I'll let Steven do the talking. So here he is, and I'll talk to you next. I was already obviously familiar with who you are as a person, what you've done musically and stuff like that. But we worked together when I was at Century Media Records, and it was one of those things. It was funny because you were doing stuff with the guys in that band, the Agony Scene,
right?
And it was just really random because it was like the vocalist of that band was the one I communicated with the most, and he he was like, yeah, there's this local guy in town does a lot of stuff for us, and he just dropped your name like in an email, like very casually, not to say that he needed to like build you up, like, oh dude, this is Mr. Egerton from the Descendents and all, and like not like he would do that in email, but he was so casual about it. I saw your name in there, and I was like, oh shit, that's right. And like, I immediately took me back to, my 14, 15-year-old self. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, wait, I have to communicate with Steve. Oh, I don't know if I could do that. And I'm sure I'm sure a lot of people kind of have that sort of like interactivity with you where it's like, they view you as this entity, as like, oh my gosh, you are an institution, my friend.
I have done my best to not have it be that way for people
right.
any longer than it need be, because the reality of it is that the music scene that I grew up in, the people who are now, revered and whatever, the Black Flags and the TSOLs and the Dead Kennedys and the whatever bands, were coming around, coming through Salt Lake, were very approachable, because that was the nature of the scene then. This was a tiny thing with not very many people involved in it. The fact that there was anybody there at all was kind of amazing. So it was, everybody was very accessible. You're these people that were making art that, was so incredibly meaningful to you as a kid, were people that you could just walk up to and ask questions and talk to and get a feel for what they were like. That part of the scene, if you'll call it that, was really, really impressive to me, and something that, to the best of my ability, if I can carry it on, I do, because that was something that, well, and I'm just a dude. Like I'm a dad. Like I'm a soccer dad. I go pick up the kids. Like I'm a very ordinary guy. So the fact that I've been lucky enough to be involved with music that had impact on people was sheerly, luck and happenstance. And, not that the passion wasn't there for it. My passion's as great as, anybody else's, any other famous musician or whatever, any famous musician. Like I'm equally passionate about what I do. But for these bands, there was never really much expectation of anything beyond getting to play with your friends in a room, maybe some shows, because that would be cool. It'd be fun to go play a show. That's where this comes from. This music comes from, the excitement of actually creating the music with your friends in a room. That's where it starts. And so the fact that what happened in those little rooms and, spread out across the country had enough of an impact to eventually, for us to even be talking about it now,
right.
All these years on, is amazing and highly unexpected. So you'll find a great deal of characters throughout all this that are, very ordinary guys that are just as surprised as they could be that like anyone is, that it had the kind of impact that it did. There's tons of bands from our time and place that have that same feel. We just did a bunch of shows. Flag just did a bunch of shows with TSOL, who were literally the very first guys that ever took Carl and I under their wing. In our old band in Salt Lake City when we were kids, they took us out on all the first shows we got to do outside of town, and they were very ordinary guys to us, very cool guys that really helped us out, and they were, not ordinary but approachable. I guess is more. just, guys in a band. They were stoked to be there. We were stoked to be there. And they were like, wow, you guys are cool. Here, let's come do some other shows. And they had a massive impact on my life. And that's still what they're like now too. They're those guys, that grew up loving this, stoked to get to do it, appreciative that they get to do it, and knowingly lucky that they've had such a long time of being able to do it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think the most important point, and obviously, like, I think it reflects on, pretty much every aspect of obviously what you've done musically, is the fact that the moment that you think you're cool, you're not cool. Like that, especially from our culture, as far as like when you start to think that, what you have, done, however large or small of an impact it is, you feel like that is like, oh my God, like, yeah, I'm fucking awesome. That's when you cross over and you start to lose perspective of, obviously, like you were saying, why you did it in the first place, who you are. Like, if you're even a real person, like, you just start to lose that, and then you become disconnected from everything that started you off.
Absolutely. And there's the luck, of getting to play with Descendents in the first place, which Carl and I were fanatical about Descendents when we were kids. So for us to get to play with them at all was already amazing. Well, then, we did those records and those tours, and then, moved on to being all was fraught with like no, not much popularity or anybody really, there were some diehard people that loved what we did. There's no question. And but the funny thing is, like, the way it felt and worked for us playing the music, it was really basically the same, only, the first all show, there were 35 people there. Right. And the ebb and flow that has been part of it and exists now to this day is welcome, in that it helps maintain your perspective on where what this really is and how fortunate you are to get to even do it.
Yeah.
For anybody to even give a shit this far in is amazing.
Right. Yeah. No. And we'll hit on some of that a little bit later, but I wanted to back you up. Like you mentioned, obviously Salt Lake City, that's where you were born and raised, correct?
I wasn't born there, but I lived there, most of from my age 4 till 20. I left and moved to Washington, D.C. So I lived there, all of my formative years.
Yeah.
And Salt Lake, I mean, it has the known quantity differences from other cities, and that it's
well, the thing that always surprised me about Salt Lake City every time I toured through there, I mean, it's one of the easiest towns to get around. I absolutely love the way that it's set up, as far as like, all right, the temple's at the center. I'll meet you on 15 north and 17 south, or whatever.
Absolutely.
And I just, it's amazing.
Growing up, it was funny because the first times that I started to go to other cities, and I was like, wow, this was really laid out stupid, because Salt Lake is just, it's an iron grid, extending, until you basically run into mountains, or whatever. It just kind of flows that way. And it was an interesting city in the late 70s, early 80s, because it was close enough to California, and there was an influx of people coming to Salt Lake from other places, from California in particular, because the skiing was really good there. So Salt Lake, had the very strong Mormon connection that, it's famous for. And yet there was a strong rebellious streak amongst young people in Salt Lake City. And it really dates back to, before there was punk rock or anything else. I mean, there was always a strong rebellious element in Salt Lake, because I think, it's such an extreme, the Mormon influence is so extreme that, it couldn't help but breed some far extremes on the other end of things. And so that was the nature of Salt Lake. So punk rock, took hold very early and very strong in Salt Lake. And we actually had a surprisingly good scene there. A lot of bands come through and would be very surprised by how many people were there. And we had very good local bands. And, so it was an interesting place.
Yeah.
For sure.
What was your family structure like? Like mom and dad? Do you have brothers and sisters?
No, I'm an only, and shortly after arriving in Salt Lake, my dad sort of went on his own path. And,
yeah, sure. Took off.
So it's just, it was just mom and I.
Got it.
My mom and I, and we grew up in a pretty poor part of town, and but fine, we had a happy life, and when I was in junior high, in 7th grade, is where I met Carl Alvarez, and we hit it off pretty quickly. And here we are, all of these years later, still playing together. And so we impacted each other's lives, pretty dramatically. And we grew up in punk rock together. Once we discovered it, we were like, whoa, and we diverted, way over there. And that was our nature. We quit school, and we, we're music, just music fanatics. That's really what we were. And, in Salt Lake, there were a lot of like-minded people, and we were lucky to have that environment, really.
Yeah.
It was cool.
What was your mom doing for work while you guys were there? Just kind of, odds and ends in order to obviously take care of the household, so to speak?
No, it was more, I was an interruption in the beginning of a college education, which as soon as I was functional enough on my own, she continued with, and is now, has a doctorate in medical informatics. I mean, she was on the path to being very smart, into being a smart person, because that's very much what she is. And so she now works at the Library of Medicine, National Library of Medicine.
Nice.
But at the time, when my dad left, we got a small apartment, and she had a job in the government documents section of the university library at the University of Utah. She really enjoyed the library environment, and just kind of followed through with that. She got a master's in anthropology, which she was interested in too, and then another master's in library sciences, and then went on to her medical informatics degree. So she had a very, very interesting trajectory, to which I was, I sort of interrupted that somewhat, but
right. Well, that's
we had a good relationship, still do.
I mean, because I like you. I mean, I'm an only child as well, and my parents got divorced when I was about 4, and I went through. Of course, I don't remember anything, but it's like, went through a hellish custody battle, ended up with my mom, and she is, far and away just like the most influential person in my life. And, I presume that you probably have the same sort of feelings towards your mother.
Absolutely. Everything. I mean, because it was just the two of us. There was really just us. So, all the the music that was played in my house, she taught me my first chords on guitar, taught me,
That's
attempted
amazing.
to teach me how to harmonize. I mean, she was very supportive of what I did and what I was trying to do. And, she had the musical bent. So did my dad, but she definitely did. And she was more than happy to, foster it for me. And so, very much, of course, a huge influence on, me pursuing the things that I did. And
so that's awesome that she was sitting down with you and showing you chords on the guitar and how to sing and stuff like that.
Totally. Yeah. She taught me how to sort of listen to a song around on the guitar one string at a time until I found notes that matched. She helped me learn how to use my ear,
wow.
Which really was, I took lessons too, at different points when I was young, and I started playing guitar pretty young. I was 9 when I started. The lessons, they certainly, touched on techniques and so on, but I never learned to read music or anything like that. I learned, scales and things, things that normal guitar players kind of learn in guitar lessons. But how to use my ear, my mom taught me. And really, to this day, it's that initial, thing that she taught me that has served me through everything else I do. Because now I mix and master records. I have a studio. I produce a few records a year.
Right.
Everything I do, I use my ear. I use that thing that she taught me all those years ago. And that combined with probably a little bit of an analytical nature, that's how it comes together.
That's how it manifested itself over time. As you mentioned, obviously, meeting Carl, and that was in junior high, and obviously as you started to go through the motions of being completely swallowed up by punk and everything that it was. You said, when did you actually drop out of school?
I got kicked out about a quarter of the way into my junior year.
I maybe I should rephrase that. When did you get kicked out?
when was I ejected? Yeah, I was forced to be ejected at age barely 16.
Wow.
Well, I was a wreck all the way through school. It was a mess.
Was it
hyperactive?
Okay. Was it a matter of just not showing up as well, and just being super disruptive in classes?
It wasn't so much acting out. It was just, a complete disinterest. I decided at 5 I wanted to be musician for the rest of my life, and that's it. I never really did anything else, and school was meaningless to me because I felt, stupidly, of course, that there was nothing that they could teach me, because unless they were teaching music.
Right.
So that, and I had the hyperactivity. I guess now they would have called it ADHD, and unfortunately, what happened is they diagnosed me with that in junior high. And by then, the damage was already done. I had already kind of missed so much school. I mean, I was attending. I was there. I wasn't, in any way connected to it.
Right.
So, I didn't learn any basic thing you learn in school. No, I'm still terrible with all of it. Anyway, they moved me along, and I got a job as a dishwasher, and just, and then I ran away from home at 16, hitchhiked to Los Angeles, immersed myself as much as I could. That, I went down there with hopes of seeing Black Flag, who were unfortunately on their first U.S. tour, and I totally missed them. But I got to see a ton of other amazing stuff, and that really cemented, a lot of my musical, direction and that kind of thing.
I think everybody, between the ages of 8 and, 15, 16 or whatever, has the notion to screw you, mom or dad or family member or whoever, I'm going to run away. But then for you to actually do that and also follow through on what you want to do in regards to the, musician career that you wanted to have ever since you were 5 years old, that takes, guts, stupidity, a mixture of all of it.
Absolutely. No, I'm brazen idiocy, really. I mean, in my case, I would say that I'm a reasonably compliant on most things. I'm willing to go along with whatever. Somebody wants to do this way. Yeah, okay, let's do that. That's cool by me. But there is a streak of stubbornness that cannot be broken, and that part of me was wholly unwilling to accept anything except that I would do music or die trying. And that was that. There was no question about that. And I know that it just absolutely drove my mother insane. And my running away had really no, it wasn't a fuck you, it wasn't like that. It was more of a I am going to pursue my thing now.
Right.
I think that I own the world, and I'm 16, I'm a full grown up, and I know everything. And it was just brazen idiocy. And I, got in hitchhiked to California, saw bands, and immersed myself in it. And then a few months later, I had to call mom and beg for a bus ticket home. That's just how it worked. Then I got home and sort of got back together with the guys, in Massacre Guys. That's the band that I was in Salt Lake. We were together for ages. And Carl was around us at the very beginning, but he didn't play bass yet. So we had another guy for a while, Paul was his name. And then Paul, it was time to leave, and Carl had been sort of playing bass on his own at home. We'd found some bass somewhere, and we had it it was just sitting at his house, and he'd been kind of jamming out on it himself, and he started to kind of get it. So we were like, well, fuck it, let's get Carl. It made perfect sense. And then he had an incredible knack for it. And so, Carl is a highly intelligent and, resourceful person. So he sort of just figured out how to do it instantly. Mm-hmm. He was just good, and so, from then on we played together.
Yeah.
And that really didn't stop much.
Right. It's funny too, because a lot of people, or a lot of the reference points that people mention you as far as a guitarist is concerned is that you are extremely well versed at this genre of music as far as what you the style in which you play, it's unique. And it's just funny because very rarely do you hear people especially within punk and independent music in general, labeled as some sort of virtuoso. That's labeled for metal, or that's labeled for some sort of Steve Vai, that, those sort of people.
Right.
And it's just funny because it's hearing the way that you were just learning shit as you went along, and then now people look back at it and be like, man, you're an incredible guitarist, and I'm sure you're just well, I guess.
It's funny, that people sort of, my musical trajectory, I guess one thing that points to how all of this sort of ended up the way it did was that music that was available to listen to in my house. We weren't really a radio family. We never listened to the radio in my house. So there were records, and my mom was a deep music fan. So records were like Leon Russell, the Beatles, Joe Cocker, Emmylou Harris. Like there was that kind of music around. The Beatles were the thing that actually, I mean, it still is my band. The Beatles, by all, for sure, are the band that inspired me to do anything musically ever. Well, somewhere, I was probably following a pretty normal musical trajectory, hearing whatever was coming around. And my uncle got me a couple of Kiss records for my birthday one year. Kiss, yeah, okay, I like this stuff. This is pretty good. I started to get into that. Well, then when I was 11, a neighbor gave me the second Frank Zappa record, which is called Absolutely Free, The Mothers of Invention, right? Mm-hmm. And that record is fucking weird. I mean, it's just on another planet.
Right.
It's absolutely nothing in common with any of the kind of pop music forms that I had been exposed to, whether they be rock or pure pop like the Beatles or whatever. Here's this stuff over here just on some other planet.
Yeah, your brain at 11 years old realistically is not able to handle a person like Frank Zappa.
Absolutely. But I went to this record like a duck to water. I just loved it. I was crazy about it. And I was obsessive about it. It altered my path. Really what happened is I just missed out on the stuff that anybody else my age was listening to. I was completely unaware of it because it sent me in this funny direction. About the same time that happened, my mom started singing in a band with some guys she worked with. And my mom has a pretty good voice. And so they said, hey, why don't you come sing? So, okay. So she did. And she was singing in this band, and they would practice pretty often. They played a few parties, and, it was just fun for them. Well, the guitar player in that band, he was going to business school, and he was deeply influenced by Jeff Beck, John McLaughlin, like prog rock, fusion and prog rock and that kind of thing.
Right.
And watching him, he was the first guy that I was able to watch that was like a really extremely good guitar player. I could watch. Granted, I'd only been playing a couple of years. I'm watching this guy go, whoa, what the fuck? Like, that is gnarly what that guy's doing. And so he actually was one of my first teachers, and he turned me on to, prog rock, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Larry Coryell, like, these really insane guitar players, and other jazz music, Thelonious Monk, stuff that was just not typical for a kid by then. I was, getting into 12, 13, 14. People didn't listen to that stuff at my age. None of my friends did, except Carl, because he was forced to listen to it because that's what I listened to. But, I missed out on metal entirely. I didn't even know anything about metal. So I'm over here in like prog rock land.
Right.
And then a kid in my junior high bought Nevermind the Bollocks. And the first time I heard it, I was like, this is lame. Well, then the second time I heard it, I was like, actually, this isn't lame. I kind of like this. And so when I was, I don't know, 13, 14, it came out in the stores. I bought it, and I went absolutely ballistic for it. And from then on, punk rock. Now, at that point, though, punk rock, if you live, maybe this probably isn't true if you live in a big city, but if you live, in a little strange city like I did, that, we were getting this stuff filtered from other cities. There was one record store in town buying punk rock records.
Salt Lake City was never defined as a cultural hub.
Not in any way. So what would fall under the umbrella of punk rock to a Salt Lake guy in 1980, 81, 79, would have encompassed everything from the Stranglers, the Police, Devo, the early two-tone ska records, eventually stuff from Los Angeles, the New York stuff, obviously the Ramones, but like Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and, all of these convergent weird influences coming in from, but it wasn't narrowed down to like hardcore. That was later for us in Salt Lake. We'd already been listening to all kinds of weird shit before we ever heard Black Flag even. It took a while for that stuff to make it to Salt Lake. So, there was this big breadth of interesting music that my friends and I were all listening to. That included, very fringe stuff from a punk rock angle. And it even, and it might include like the stiff record stuff, like, Elvis Costello or Nick Lowe and all of these things, Robert Fripp, anything that wasn't Zeppelin is what we were listening to, basically.
Right.
So it was all of those things coming together but that prog rock influence was in there. That never really left. Now, that doesn't mean that I knew a damn thing about what I was playing.
Right.
I didn't know how to play prog rock. I don't know anything about music theory. I don't know anything about any of that stuff. I know I know where I am on the neck. I mean, I speak music reasonably well, but I don't read music at all. So anybody, assuming that I know something about music or that there was any kind of like real incredible playing ability is totally mistaken. I emulated things that I loved that I heard. I learned those things and tried to sort of incorporate them by my own ear, not by knowledge of what I was doing.
Hearing your own experience about the way, the different musical inputs, it's always nice to hear people are allowed to obviously get into whatever music they're allowed. I mean, it happened to me where it's like, I am 14, 15, 16 years old. I had already gotten into the pop punk that I was personally raised on, your Epitaph, your Fat Records, that sort of stuff, like NoFX, Propaganda, all that sort of, that stuff in the mid 90s. But then it's like for 3 years, I was completely swallowed up by like hardcore. And it's like, that's like all I listened to. But then only through like starting to work at like an independent record store, it broke my mind of, okay, I can listen to other stuff. And it's like, to have that realization, obviously at your, when you were, 10, 11, 12 and start to have your head cracked open and be like, oh dude, I can listen to anything. It obviously, that totally informs obviously how, essentially the Descendents obviously approached the way that they projected their music on the world, that it was like, well, yeah, we're part of the scene, but we're also kind of really, really weird and thinking about feelings and girls and stuff. Like,
okay, so Descendents, the way they entered the picture for me was that before the Fat EP came out, Posh Boy Records put out a cassette, and they had worked something out where they got a whole bunch of songs from SST and New Alliance and some Posh Boy stuff, and it was this weird mixture of like TSOL kind of, some Social Distortion was on there, the Descendants were on there, Black Flag was on there. It was just this funny cassette, and that had what was actually a rough mix of I Like Food and Wiener Schnitzel. So I heard that and just about died. I was like, oh my God, that's the fucking coolest thing I've ever heard. What the fuck? This band is amazing. We found the Fat EP. We bitched at our local record store and they got it in for us. And My Little College came out, but like those South Bay bands and the Orange County bands, in my neck of the woods, people were calling them hardcore bands, way back when. So, are outside of that mold, and I remember that they really triggered the Beatle thing in me. I don't think I knew why, but they did because so many of the old bands were melodic. The British ones in particular. I mean, if you look at the Buzzcocks, they were every bit as much as Descendants or something, but it was really noticeably different in Descendants. Something about the melodies that really caught my ear. And that's what we were trying to do in Salt Lake. As soon as Carl started playing, we always tried to make an effort to separate our parts enough, that it wasn't just the Ramones, like I'm playing downstrokes and Carl's playing downstrokes and just mimicking the guitar lines.
Right.
We were always trying to establish a strong difference between the instruments so that they could both kind of have their own voice. We were trying to figure out that was a weird turning point, that record for us. That made a huge impact on us.
Pardon the interruption, my friends, but I am here to talk to you about something awesome, and that something awesome is Audible. Audible is the leading provider of downloadable audiobooks, and this very show, has a special offer exclusively for you fine people listening. I wanted to thank them so much for wanting to participate in this show and invest in what we have going on here. It's amazing. Audible offers over 150,000 books covering virtually every genre, from mystery to science fiction to biographies. You name it, they have it. Listen to audiobooks anytime, anywhere, including iPhones, your iPad. If you have something that is digital, you can probably listen to Audible on it. And here's the best part. Audible is offering 100 Words listeners a completely free audiobook along with a 30-day trial. Go to audiblepodcast.com/100words to take advantage of this special offer. And by doing so, not only do you get the chance to check out an awesome service, but you support this show. If you guys do this, it's free. It will cost you absolutely nothing. Just check it out. See if you enjoy it. The show, get some kickbacks, get some like Audible's like, wow, this is amazing. We have 1 million people that have signed up to do this. Do it and you'll get something free. I want to recommend something to you as well. It is a book that I personally read in the paperback form. You don't need to do that. You can just listen to it. Bob Mould, the singer of such legendary bands like Husker Du, Sugar, and his own storied solo career, he wrote a book called Shine a Light, and it's on Audible. You can get that for free. It's like 6-7 hours worth of awesomeness. So go there, audiblepodcast.com/100 words, and you get it for free. Now here's the rest of our chat.
To have that realization when you watch something that's being created in front of you that kind of already exists and it expresses how you either feel or what you want to accomplish musically, like you guys just saw that and were like, oh shit, yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Like that's what we want to do.
It was coming in a different form,
right?
You know, but to hear somebody else doing it, and you know, I think as a musician, I had a very strange the way I discovered the band of one of my favorite bands of all time was somebody sort of pointing out that their guitar player, Piggy, may he rest in peace, was playing a lot of chords very similar to what I would choose to play. And when I heard it the first time, I was like, whoa, that's really weird. Like I get that. Like I speak that language right there. Only that guy's playing metal.
Right.
Weird. Like, you know, what a funny surprise that was.
Right. And I think just because this like kind of encapsulates obviously a lot of, well, pretty much, you know, most of your musical career as far as, you know, obviously focusing on Descendents and all. I mean, Filmage, I had a chance to see it. I saw one of the first Southern California showings, like one of the Long Beach.
Uh-huh.
I mean, first of all, I'm sure it's mind blowing for you to be like, oh, cool, there's a documentary about bands I played in. Like, that's weird. I'm sure that was like when the project first got approached to you, I'm sure you were just like, well, good luck.
It's like, this is our job. We're going to be able to do a great job at this. You should let us do it. And I was like, fuck, okay, go ahead, fine. I put everybody in contact and said, hey, these are my buddies. They want to do a documentary. And they sort of ran with it, and they would go, hey, do you guys have any blah, blah, blah? Okay, fine. So we send them all of our shit, you know, here's every video of it I have, you know, story, and between the interviews, we're able to sort of put the timeline of how everything went together. And it was really cool for me because I got to learn a few things in it. I mean, I've been up Bill's ass for years asking any little question that I possibly could about, you know, how this music came about. And, you know, I was friends with Frank. You know, Frank was a pal. You know, we go fishing together all the time. And, you know, I've gotten to learn firsthand from all the guys that were involved in the band, you know, certain aspects of it. But, you know, I learned a lot of things in it. You know, I was like, whoa. That's cool, you know, especially about the period, the real formation of the band.
I walked away from it feeling, it's weird, but it's like feeling like all of the time that I've spent within the confines of this independent music scene, like I feel validated, you know, like I left being like, dude, I haven't wasted my time with this, you know, and it was obviously, I know that that's not like the intent of the movie, but like the just the way that it kind of laid everything out in regards to what we were talking about earlier, as far as like we're obviously just dudes. We've always been just dudes. We just happen to play in this band. And then on top of that, also putting it all in context of like, dude, we ate shit for years and years and years, and no one cared about us. And like to have it kind of come full circle to where it's like, oh, okay, we now have people that care about us. Like it just makes it feel that sort of, you know, redemption story-ish and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure those levels of emotion you kind of felt when you were watching the movie too.
Oh, well, the interesting points that it makes that I see a lot now looking back over it over time was that everybody in the fucking audience must have been a musician, because basically, I mean, we're talking about these little tiny shows played to very few people. You know, that's what this was. I mean, this was music made, you know, in a funny way. It never needed to even leave the practice room. You know, there were just like shows. Oh, okay, yeah, we'll play shows. You know, that, I mean, or then at that time. But the same thing was kind of true for us in Salt Lake, for Carlos. You know, that those paths were very similar. You know, so the fact that these few people in the audience took to this music so strongly, and as it did grow a little bit, that, you know, people across the country started hearing it and identifying with it so strongly that it actually, all of that time and all of the other complexities of content is where, like, we don't really, you know, we look like punk rockers, and we, you know, we, you know, every single thing that would do us any good is not, you know, as far as like trying to make the band popular, it was never done.
Right.
shit about that. Or had, and when, we could make a living from, it was like an absolutely preposterous living. And by the same token, we considered that success. As far as we were concerned, we were Van Halen, even though like really we were in a band and we made $5 a day. But as far as where we were at with it, fuck yeah. Like we don't have real jobs. We just play music full time. I can't believe we get to do this. That's where our heads were at. We were already as successful as we ever expected. We were already more successful than we probably ever expected to be.
Right.
Before anyone even really gave a shit, when the records were still selling almost nothing. And
right.
We were just able to go on tour.
Bands that obviously start with no sort of, quote unquote business plan in mind. It's very incremental, exactly how you're saying, where it's like, okay, you record a demo, you record a 7-inch, you record, oh, wow, we get an LP. Cool. It's step by step. And then when you're actually at that step that you're talking about, where it's like, hey, we're on tour, we're pretty broke, but we are on tour. Like, this is amazing. Holding on to that feeling. And like you said, being successful, even though really by all definitions of the term, like from a mainstream society, you're, not successful.
Yeah, totally live in poverty, but
right.
Give a shit, because you're just getting to tour at that level was already culmination of all of that 5-year-old dream of mine of wanting to do this, and that to that level. That was all I needed at that point. What that meant to be able to do it at that level at all, it was mind-boggling.
Yeah. Well,
the thing is, there's been continual renewal of that. Okay, at the point that I remember during the late 80s, early 90s with All, I was like, God, I wonder what it would be like to sell, as many records as like Slip It In sold.
Mm-hmm.
Slip It In had sold 60,000, right? Enough to get you thrown off of most labels at that time. That was our like, big business goal or whatever. Like, I wonder if we could sell 60,000 or whatever, and meanwhile we're putting records out about farting or whatever. And, but like that was, we would have liked to have seen that happen. And so in 97, when we put out Everything Sucks, it sold about 200,000 within the space of a year. And we were just, our jaws were on the floor. We were like, are you fucking kidding me?
Right.
Like, it just seemed like a joke, like, I can't believe it. That many people bought this record.
Right.
Like, and so for us, the element of sort of surprise and all of that is still very much there. I mean, we're all business aware now. We're not, we're grown-ups. We're 50. We got kids. We have houses and mortgages. And we have to think about all of those things. They matter now. As far as the roots of the band and the trajectory of the band over time, nothing could have been more unexpected.
Right. Well, and I think something else. I'm glad you mentioned like obviously like there are financial realities. There are things that you have families to provide for, everything that you just listed. But I think that really speaks to the nature of the band, because especially after watching the movie, where it's like, you guys were always practical, and I mean practical in a sense of like, okay, we're going to move to the Midwest and be based out of here because it's easier for us to get to both coasts. Like, no fucking band. Like, if someone, like, if someone, no, I know. And I mean, still to this day, like, I've never heard of a band. You hear of bands moving to New York City or LA, like, obviously that makes sense. But from the way that you guys described it, it was every move that you guys have made, it seems like it's practical in the sense of like, it makes sense between, the four of you guys, where it's just like, oh yeah, like, of course, yeah, that makes sense. Why would we not do that?
We're still very much that way. And it really is based in the sort of DIY thing that we kind of grew up seeing, or in Bill's case was involved in, if you think about Black Flag and SST and,
right,
all of those things. I mean, he witnessed all of that level of it firsthand. And in Salt Lake, the realities of the local scene and being able to tour and so on were different, from the Salt Lake perspective than they were from the Los Angeles perspective. Because, of course, in LA, in that greater area, you could have many shows. In Salt Lake, that was harder. You had to travel really far to go play a show outside of Salt Lake. So that was more complicated. But living frugally was kind of second nature. we had to make practical decisions about how we did things. We can't afford to do what these guys right here. Like, these guys are on a bus. We can't swing that. That's not going to work. Like, we're not going to make enough money to even fucking pay our rent when we get home if we do that. A lot of the trappings that many of the other bands were able to sort of get into and did, they weren't things that we could really make work for us.
Right.
It's a smaller band.
Yeah.
For sure.
You know, as the movie documents, you had to start realizing the financial realities of being like, well, it's tough to make a living out of this thing. Like, was it difficult for you to kind of I wouldn't even say let go of the notion of obviously like being a quote unquote musician, but like, you know, when real life starts to infiltrate the world that you're obviously trying to build for yourself, was that in your own mind, was that a difficult transition for you? Or was it like, well, this is just something I need to do because of A, B, and C?
No, it was difficult in some regards. So the way that all went down is all kind of fizzled out as far as being able to really tour much, because I think we peaked. Like I said, we started out with 35 people at our first show. We built it up over many years to where we, you know, some people at our shows. You know, it was okay. We could function, and living in the Midwest with low overhead, we had all the food we needed. We were okay. You know, at a certain point, our audience. Well, let me back up a little bit. So we did our major label record. We thought, okay, well, fuck it, let's try it. Let's see if you know what we can do. So we do our major label record, and it fails miserably. Sells 20,000. Really, over the course of the next few years, I think our audience followed us for a long time that we built up. I think a lot of them kind of grew up and had to get jobs and had started families, and, you know, they couldn't, you know, or they just lost interest in the band, whatever, something. The shows got smaller and smaller, and we probably toured too much, sure of that. And so, you know, we weren't really making enough money to justify being out there. We could scarcely, you know, keep a functional life together. And by then, you know, a couple of us were married, and, you know, three of us were married in all. It didn't break up. There was no thing. It's kind of, we can't really do this. And so, you know, no tours really came up anymore. And so I moved down here to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I live now. I did that. I had a daughter by then, and I wanted my daughter to, you know, have like grandparents. And my in-laws were, you know, they were ready and waiting, retired, ready for you know, full on like grandparents.
Right.
You know, and it was like, okay, well, this is cheaper than living in Colorado. And so we pulled up stakes, and my wife and I came here with our daughter. The first thing I did was, right when I got here, I was contacted by some friends in the band MXPX. This was in 2004, and they were like, dude, why don't you come, you know, if you're not touring or anything, why don't you come out and be our monitor engineer, drum tech, whatever you want to do. So that's what I did. I went out and I was a tech, and I worked for about a year for MXPX teching. Started as a drum tech. Shortly after that, I added monitors to it. I was helping with, you know, the bass tech. You know, I was very involved as a crew guy. You know, we'd be out playing with people, and they're like, you know, what are you doing here? Are you kidding me? Like, you're a tech? And I was like, hell yes, it was great.
Right.
They paid me a very decent wage. I was on a bus. You know, my comfort level was high. I wasn't driving anymore. I was a driver and all. You know, I did all the night driving. You know, I was like in a bunk watching movies. It was like, God, this is cake. You know, and people would ask, are you bitter about, you know, how that's gone on? These bands have gone on to be huge. You know, many of them using, you know, my expectations were never. This is completely outside of any expectation any of us ever had. I had a successful career all the way from beginning to end, and if I never get to do it again, I still won.
Right.
That was my attitude in 2004.
Yeah.
You know, that was really how I saw it. I was like, dude, I won. Well, then my son was born, and I had to kind of, you know, I had to stop touring. You know, we needed me at home.
Yeah.
So that began a 5-year period of nothing. No shows, nothing. I did like a couple of shows. That's it for 5 years.
Right.
Those years were hard. I will fully admit that. I could never commit to a band down here because, to me, a band is based around an incredible practice regimen. That's how you get good. That's what you do. You practice your fucking asses off until you're really, really good.
Right.
That's the life. You know, that couldn't happen here. I was only sporadic. So I really didn't do anything except I started, you know, I had my studio here, I was recording bands, and, you know, I was still involved in music.
Right.
I was still part of music, still doing okay.
Yeah.
I spent about a year working at Guitar Center while I built my studio. That was a very depressing, horrible year. I will fully admit that.
Yeah. No, I think it's one of those things too, where it's just like, I mean, what makes those transition periods difficult is where it's like, you just have to reframe the context in which you're dealing with whatever it is that you thought you were, you know? It's obviously no one ever views themselves as like, oh, dude, I'm going to be the retail king at, Guitar Center or, video store or whatever. So it's like, I see why that it's not so much you're just like, oh man, it's such a bummer. I have to be at home with my family. Like, that's terrible. But it's like, well, no, like I just have to I'm trying to reframe what it was that I've been doing for a majority of my life.
Absolutely. It's real life. I mean, it's raising kids and trying to keep a roof over everybody's head. And, it's that. I mean, and so, I dove to it the best I could, and I had my studio. And so at least I wasn't putting roofs in houses. As far as I was concerned, I was still lucky.
Yeah.
So, and, writing, just kind of writing music, writing demos, and all kind of started getting a couple offers here and there. We'd play some shows, and so that started to be fun. I even had a little bit of, an occasional show. And, oh, this is cool. And, well, then we had some shows booked, I guess around that time, around the time that we started doing the occasional all show is when we started seeing noticeable effects in Bill Stevenson's health, and how he was doing sort of on all fronts. None of us could have understood what was coming. We, of course, that was just completely like out of the blue when it finally did happen. But so we were supposed to go do some shows, and the day before, like I get the phone call that Bill's in the hospital and he's just had this pulmonary embolism, huge, like a massive, like a sausage-sized, blood clot coming from his legs and jamming through his heart into his lungs, nearly killing him, right? So, at that point, nobody really knew what was going to happen from then on. He had become pretty not that functional. What had been happening leading up, or sort of through that time was that I got, bored with not doing music, and I was kind of starting to freak out about it. So I did that record. It's called The 7 Degrees of Stephen Egerton, which is like me trying to address one thing that I haven't ever been particularly strong at, which is writing songs.
Sure.
If you go back through, Descendents and all, I'm far and away our least songwriter. And of those songs, none of them are like, classics or nothing. I like clean sheets or whatever. I wrote I wrote stuff that really didn't impact people much. And of course, as a Beatles fan, ultimately, I wanted to write songs that impact people. I mean, that's what I would have loved to have been able to do. That just wasn't in the cards for me. I couldn't do that. I could do lots of other stuff, but the songwriting thing never came to me that well. Lyrics never came to me that well. Well, the 7 Degrees record was part of me trying to learn how to be a better songwriter. I was writing the melodies myself. It got me. It was fun for me because I got to play the drums and bass, which I love playing those just as much as guitar. I'm really fanatical about drums, really crazy about drums. So I made that record, just to sort of keep me losing my mind.
Yeah.
Stuck down here in the middle of nowhere with no friends.
Right. Well, it's cool because I really like the way that you phrased it earlier, where it's just like people can go one of two ways when music starts to be for lack of a better term, a chore, in the sense of like, oh man, real life gets in the way, whatever. But you still did what you did to be involved, and like you said, to not be crazy, because like obviously there's the flip side of that where you just give up on music. Like, I know that's not an option for people like you and me, but the other people where it's like, well, I can't give that up because this shit is too hard. I can't pay attention to it anymore. I can't focus on it. But you didn't do that, obviously.
Yeah, no, that definitely wasn't my problem. Anything I was exploding with stuff at different periods. I'd have these really creative little bursts where I just jam out a bunch of songs and be like, whoa, cool. Yeah. I wrote some lyrics that I didn't hate, a couple times. I was like, wow, fuck, all right. That's cool. Like, maybe there's still, something around in there. So I had to find context in which I could still do, in which I could do something musical. And touring was going to be out of the question. But the 7 Degrees record at least made it so I could, I could be involved in music and I could do something. I found a way to be involved in it still, even if it sold 1,000 copies. Fine. Okay. I don't care. Like, I'm compelled to do this. I've been compelled my entire life. Like, this is what I self-identify as. This is what I do. I may not, get to do it in any real way, but still, when if somebody asks me what I am, I'm a musician. That's what I am.
Right. Yeah. This is how I identify myself.
I made that record and didn't, I had no idea what it would do, and I didn't really give a fuck what it would do, really. I was compelled to make it. I loved doing it. I had a blast. I loved how all the songs came out. I loved the funny, weird collaboration thing of just sending my song off to somebody and getting it back and going, wow, kick ass. Like, listen to what this guy did. That's great, And so that was really fun. Well, then I did a couple little release shows for that. And Bill and his family came down to Tulsa, and he learned some of the songs and he played drums with me. Well, it was a very interesting thing because playing with Bill and Carl, obviously, but with Bill, Bill was slowing down really bad. Too long before those shows, I was talking to Bill on the phone, and he's like, dude, I can't, like, my vision is going funny. Like, I might look at you and it would look like your arm is sticking out of your head. I don't know what the fuck's going on. So he went to the optometrist who said, your eyes are fine. Go get an MRI. And he did, and that's when they found the brain tumor. With the brain tumor was pressing on his optic nerve, which is causing the visual distortions he was seeing. So, a month or so passes. We did the little, 7 Degrees shows, and then Bill goes there, has his surgery, comes out alive. We're all, blown away. And of course, the first time I talked to him on the phone afterwards, I didn't call him the next day. I called him the day after that. I figured he was probably, completely comatose. It's like turning the clock back 15 years. He's hyper energetic, like he was when we were, in 1987,
right.
Whatever, like 86, 87, all over again. Like, wow, okay. So he's healing. Everything is going good. That's great. And I think Milo's involvement in the 7 Degrees record kind of woke a little bit of his thing up, because I had asked him to sing on the song, and I wrote the lyrics. All you have to do is drive to my friend's house. He lives an hour from you. Walk through the door, sing it 4 times, walk out. All you have to do. Like, I won't put you through, the ringer on this. He's like, cool, no problem. So he went and did it. He had fun. Around the same time, we're kind of, Dad, so what about this band? Like, you ever play, any shows with this band? So all of a sudden, like, Milo, was kind of like, I want to play a show. That wasn't out of the question. And then he got an offer to play Australia. And I think Milo, who normally is like, well, I can't really do it. He was like, Bill survived death. He's got big debts. Maybe we should just go ahead and take these shows. Like, we'll go ahead and do this.
Right.
I'm in the mood. So we did that. And I think Milo from that discovered that he could do, shows in a limited capacity, really have fun with it. It wasn't a choice of like, do one of the two, or the other, science or music, which is it going to be? He can do both. And so now I think he knows that. And so we can just take a handful of shows. So there it is. Like, next, I'm back to like being a part-time musician.
Yeah.
Thing I ever thought was going to happen.
Yeah. Mentioning the movie again, it's like, I just love the way that it wrapped up, because it's one of those things where it's like, now we're at a place where it's like, we are a sustainable band. We can kind of, in the sense of, we can do what we want, when we want, as we've always wanted to do, but there are no demands on us besides the demands we put on ourselves. And like, once you get to a point as a musician where you're there, it's like you joked around earlier, where it's like, oh, dude, I've won. It's funny because everybody along the way feels like they obviously have, no matter what era that they got into what you personally have done musically, it obviously doesn't matter, because they are a part of something that is obviously like honest, meaningful, however you'd like to phrase it. And it's very apparent,
There were some complications with my daughter's birth. My wife had very severe preeclampsia and kind of an experience during birth. And during her recovery, I expected to, involve as a father, but I was like the guy gung ho for kids. That wasn't me. I admit that. This was my wife's, she was like, okay, we'll do this. Fine. So we did it. Having happened was that I had to be very, very strongly involved in the beginning, like more so than I had maybe expected. And I'm sure nobody's really prepared for their first child. There's nothing like that. I was probably even less prepared for it and having to really step up as much as I could. Well, I found myself happy in that role. And so, I'm very happy as a soccer dad. I love my soccer dad thing. I'm full into it. So being completely invested in that, like I can't just be gone all the time. That's just not something I even want to do, really. But be able to do this thing part time like this and just fly in, see my buddies, have a blast, do the music for all the right reasons, go home. It's fucking killer. You can't have it better than that.
No, it feels like a redemption where it's just like, okay, after everything is said and done, the good guys do win some of the time. The worst stuff ever doesn't always bubble to the top and is the most meaningful thing of all time. It's like, no, this, you can cite your own musical careers like, well, no, yeah, like, crazy stuff can happen in times and places that you never would have imagined.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is now all of these years later, the things that made the band, the friendship angle of it, which was, of course, completely critical to the beginning of it, because that's really, where it began. That part of it is still fully intact in our band. I mean, we're friends with everybody that was ever in the band, and us guys in it now are extremely close. So, for us, getting to go play a show is going to hang out with your best friends. It's a party. It is, it's a blast. We go play a show. We all practice really hard on our own. We show up and hope for the best, but we know how to prepare for these things because we've a lot of years, learning how to do this together, and we know what to expect musically from the we've done this a long time together. So it's just all good.
Like I said, it makes people like myself extremely excited who got into you guys via the Pump Up the Volume soundtrack. It's just like, like I said, no matter what entry point a person has to what you've done musically, they feel like they can get something redemptive out of it. I think people are very black and white with the music that you've done. It's like they either fucking get it or they think it's the worst thing ever. And they just don't get it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's a good place to be.
It's amazing that so many people got it, and that's
right.
that there's new people finding it. And it's a slow process for us while putting together another record, but we're like, fuck it, there's no reason not to. Let's do another record. So we're tossing songs back and everybody's getting the demos done, and and learning each other's songs and sort of getting it together. Very cool.
It's awesome. Well, I really appreciate all the time that you've given me, and I hope it was enjoyable for you because it was for me. So,
absolutely.
Oh man, again, and I feel like I say this with so many shows, but it's like I could just talk to these people for like hours. For one, that probably isn't the most compelling content, and for two, I just feel that's a little rude. Thank you, Steven. If you haven't listened to his stuff, fucking do it. All of his stuff, his solo stuff, everything he's done with bands. He's a very talented musician, and you should pay attention to all of it, because I do. Visit 100wordspodcast.com. Visit propertyofzach.com. Our editor, as always, is Tom Richfield. And until next week, be safe, everybody.